Hello, hello, hello. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Greg DeMyers, founder and CEO of Gregory D Productions, and you are tuning into a broadcast brought to you by Events and Excellence and Productions and Promotions. And take this time right now to share this video with your friends, with your followers, and so we can reach many, many more people. Right now, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the hands of Kim Milton-Mackey. You're on mute, Kim. Unmute yourself, Kim.
It has been a day. I am so happy to have among us some of the phenomenal women. And thank you, Greg, for being phenomenal in what you do in your production company. Bishop Maxwell is coming on. He got disconnected, so hopefully he'll be back on pretty soon. But we're going to go ahead and move forward. Thank you for all the viewers who have tuned in thus far. Share and let everyone know that you are about to witness some of the phenomenal people that are right among you to share information on this evening. This is a virtual platform for change. We are here for courageous conversations to tackle tough topics. I believe the right to vote is under attack. The right to vote is the foundation of our democracy. Historically, voters of color and voters living in low-income areas have experienced voter suppression and disproportionate rates. In the past few years, Michigan, as well as other states, have made great strides in increasing equitable access to the ballot. But now, Michigan legislation is considering a package of 39 bills that would do far more harm than good for our elections. So we're here tonight to talk about that. And I have some great people among me. I have Delta Township trustee, community activist, Fonda Brewer. Wave your hand. I'll get to her in a minute. I have Ingham County Clerk Barb Byram. Wave your hand. All right. And I do have Bishop, community activist, Bishop David Maxwell. Wave your hands. And I'm going to give you a peek of them tonight. Their bios are so professional and so strong, but I asked them just to give me one paragraph that the audience would know. So first of all, I want our viewers to know that it's Fonda, not Vonda. So we want to put that in the atmosphere. Fonda Brewer was appointed to the Township Board October 2018 as a trustee and elected to serve 4-year term in the 2020 primary election. She is a proud mother of 1 daughter. Her journey also included a few amazing twists, to include working as a human resource director for Hanna-Barbera Productions and Turner Broadcasting, and as a manager of human resources for Columbia Pictures, all prior to returning to her work in the state of Michigan, where she was a manager in Field Services Department. She is also retired from Mesa. Most of all, Fonda is currently the Lansing Branch NAACP Chair, Women in NAACP. She's also serving in New Mount Calvary as the Community Engagement Outreach. So welcome, Fonda. Next, we have Clerk Barb Byram, who is currently serving in her 3rd term as an Ingham County Clerk as a certified elections administrator. Clerk Byram has successfully conducted over 28 elections. Wow. She is nationally recognized and served on several task forces, including the Election Center Security Task Force, oversees voting initiatives, and the Michigan Election Security Commission. Clerk Byram previously served 3 terms in the Michigan House of Representatives, including time as the ranking Democrat on the House Committee on Redistricting and Elections. Wow. She's also been a local business owner and graduated from Michigan State University and MSU College of Law. Wow, we got some heavy hitters. All right, Bishop Maxwell. Bishop Maxwell is married to Lady Maxwell. He has sons. He's a granddad. He currently serves as a senior pastor of Eliezer Temple Church in Lansing, the chairman of Board of Bishops of the Church of Our Lord Jesus Christ of the Apostolic Faith. Also, Bishop Maxwell is one of the founding ministers of the Clergy Forum of the Greater Lansing. a numerical group of pastors who focus on social and economic concerns of citizens in mid-Michigan. He currently serves as the director of the Mayor's Office of Community and Faith-Based Initiative for the City of Lansing and is a member of Mayor's Executive Cabinet in the City of Lansing, Michigan, and is an advisor to previous Mayor Karen Weaver of Flint, Michigan. We have some heavy hitters. Thank you all for being here on tonight. We're going to jump right in. Clerk Byram, why did so many people think, well, actually still think that the election was stolen? Please take some time to explain.
Thank you, Kim, for having me back. It's such a pleasure to be back with you. I appreciate your time and the invitation and being with such a great panel. So the reason people think our elections were stolen, specifically the November 2020 election, is because they've been being told that it was stolen continuously every single day. And you are what you eat, but you also believe what you hear constantly. So if you'll remember way back before the November election, then President Trump was telling everyone and anyone who would listen that if he lost, then the election must have been rigged. Right. He was already setting us up for the big lie. And then, of course, he did lose. And we have been hearing time and time again how the election, it was stolen. It should have been his. And I heard just recently, there were so many people at his rallies and how could he not have won? Well, you got to bring him out to vote. That's how you win. And he didn't bring them out to vote. And it's unfortunate, but because of the big lie that people have been hearing, they're using that now to justify all of this voter suppression stuff that we're not just seeing in Michigan. Kim, we are seeing them all around the state. Most of those bills were written by the Heritage Action Fund. And these bills are designed to take away the access to the ballot, take away the accountability that our elected officials should face. Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, you need to be held accountable by the voters. And if you're decreasing the number of voters that have access to the ballot, you're decreasing your accountability. And the reason some people believe that the election was stolen is because they've been told it continuously. And then add on to how demonized the media has been, right? Like any member of the press that holds these conspiracy theorists accountable just gets lobbed down with these trolls on social media. I saw it happen all day today, and so it's hard to cover, and it's hard to constantly be killing all of these false stories, and during election day, we were hearing stories about Sharpies being bad marking devices. Actually, Sharpies are the preferred ballot marking device, the Sharpie pen. The way paper was made out of bamboo. No, it's not. Just all of these conspiracy theories that people are believing. And when you hear something enough, you start to believe it. Right. And this is beyond dangerous. This is attacking our democracy, because now we see clerks being attacked. And our elections are not rigged. Michigan has some of the safest and most secure elections in the nation.
Thank you so much, Clerk Byram. Wow, you said some powerful stuff there. We're going to get back to some of those quotes, the Heritage Action Fund. Definitely want to know more about that. But Fonda, your question is, what's the reason behind the lawmakers in 47 state legislation introducing several hundred restrictive election bills? And does these restrictions disproportionately impact people of color?
Yes, they do. I'll start with the latter, then the first part of it. They absolutely do. They have no desire to see us vote. And they never thought we would do it. Because one of the things that they're trying to do is to cut off access, to limit access. And what they discovered in after the election in 2020 is that the working people need different levels of access to vote. So by having mail-in ballots, that process really opened up the door for the people that can't get to the polls because they're busy working at Big Lots and Save-A-Lots and all of those stores, trying to put food on the table for their family. So those bills those are truly voter suppression bills. Those are bills to say to us loud and clear, we don't want your vote. We don't want people of color to vote. We don't want poor people to vote. We don't want the elderly. We don't want the disabled. And we don't want our gay community. It is a clear, loud signal telling us that we're going to cut you off at every corner because you guys listen. You guys went out and voted in droves and in numbers, and we're just not going to put up with that. We will not be silenced. And I can tell you, for example, I had an opportunity to go speak locally at against Senate Bill 303 here in Michigan. And that bill was the one that's designed to require identification. And I spoke and said, absolutely not, because we have a system that works. We already require identification, but there's a process that if you happen to not bring it, you can be trusted on your word. So now they're saying, we don't trust you. And so you're going to have to bring ID, or as I heard somebody testify, or don't vote, go home.
Oh, wow.
And I told them that day, I see what you're up to. I know what you're trying to do. And that's exactly what these bills are doing. They don't want us to show up either by mail or in person. And they're doing all sorts of tactics, moving some of the ballot boxes, not allowing early voting. Non-family members can't take the votes or the ballots in for voting, just all sorts of things. So we see what they're up to, and we're just not going to allow it. We're not going to be silenced. Thank you.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. You said some powerful things there. I know I seen you when you posted something about testifying, and that kind of one of the things that kind of jugged me to even launch this platform to see what our local individuals, and I know Clerk Byram had been out there with signs and everything else everywhere, trying to let the community know, this is what we need to do. So thank you, Bishop Maxwell. Beyond Trumpism, why do you think that the recent bills introduced have been under the disguise of combating voter fraud? And why do you think we are facing these new waves of voter restrictions?
All right, thank you, Kim, and I'd like to celebrate you for such a courageous platform that is needful to talk about. First of all, I do not want to give Donald Trump Donald Trump is an extension of the historical process of disenfranchisement. This did not just start in 2020, 2021. It started in 1865, the Emancipation Proclamation, 1862, September 22nd, 1862. The enacting of that emancipation in 1863. Grant receives Lee's surrender. That goes to Texas at the Ashton Villa on the 19th of June. Total emancipation is now brought into focus. What that did, it deprived a segment of our population, which was basically white men, who basically were the only ones enfranchised to participate in this great experiment called democracy. Immediately following that, we had the Black Codes, which was an attempt to disenfranchise African Americans, people of color, from participating in democracy. Of course, Union troops occupied the South, imposed what is called Reconstruction. 1877, we know what happened. Election of 1876, it was Razor Thin. Hayes cut a deal with Tilden, became president, moved Union troops out of the South, and Black codes, which were suppressed by those Union troops, that allowed enfranchisement of African Americans in the electoral process. Then you had Jim Crow laws that basically excluded African Americans. Even the 19th Amendment that was brought upon by the suffragette movement that allowed females to vote, basically white females, still suppressed blacks through a lot of mechanisms, gerrymandering of districts, poll taxing, grandfather clauses, intimidation, just a plethora of things that demean, isolated, and marginalized black participation. The Civil Rights Movement, which became very prevalent in the 50s and the 60s, which moved the nation because of the visual impact of Emmett Till in 55, August, being brutally murdered in Money, Mississippi. Then eventually, Bloody Sunday, March of 1965, John Lewis being brutally beaten and others peacefully demonstrated by state troopers in the state of Alabama. It brought pressure to the world, and it allowed an alignment of liberal Democrats and moderate Republicans to bring about the Voting Rights Act from 1965 to recent iteration when that was rolled back. It is a systemic attempt to maintain status of power. Now, part of that is propaganda, the big lie. We call it the big lie, but in totalitarian states, non-democratic states, it is called propaganda. It is called allowing a small segment of the population to autocratically, totalitarianly rule people. Instrument in that structured, systemic approach to continue to allow that small segment, which is steeped in racism. And so you are rolling those things back because yes, our demographics will show you that people of color will become the dominant population. And this so-called American exceptionalism means accept everybody but those people who have exercised power in this nation for 400 years. So the big lie is
thank you so much. Yeah.
And I was early. You still got me?
Yeah, thank you. Cause you did a lot of cutting up, and I'm telling you, you had some meat in there, and I really didn't want to miss one word, but you did a lot of cutting off in there. We definitely gonna have you back because that is too much information and that needs to be shared. So thank you. The next question is for Clerk Byram. Can you explain to our audience HR 1 and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act? Kind of give, because we keep hearing all these things.
Yeah.
Like, let our audience know, like, what are these things? Why should we be paying attention to these things?
Well, one, you should always be paying attention because it involves your right to vote and your access to the poll. So absolutely pay attention. And when our elected officials, whether it's in the Congress or the State House, State Senate, are doing anything, we need to be paying attention because if we're not at the table, we might be on the menu. So I think we should always be paying attention, but certainly should be paying attention right now. And so the For the People Act, which is House Resolution 1, it's also Senate Resolution 1. It deals with like the nuts and bolts of election administration issues, while the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act deals in particular with racial discrimination in voting. So let me give you just like a couple of points. So For the People Act, it modernizes voter registration. It allows online voter registration, same day voter registration. So a couple things that Michigan have right now. It protects access to the ballot for individuals with disabilities. It prohibits deceptive information that discourages voters. So if you'll remember back in the November election, there were some inappropriate phone calls made with incorrect information. It would discourage that kind of practice. It requires this one speaks to my heart. It will require paper ballots. In Michigan, we have paper ballots, so we don't think much of a paper ballot. In some states, they don't have paper ballots. They vote on a laptop and send it off. We need to make sure we are voting paper ballots. So that's what For the People Act will require. It'll also expand early voting and absentee voting. Now, if you'll remember, in Michigan, we passed no reason absentee voting back in 2018. And so we may vote by absentee ballot if we request a ballot. Some states, they aren't permitted that opportunity. Also, it will expand access for individuals that don't have photo ID. It will require states to allow that signature, that affidavit, that you are who you say you are, under penalty of perjury, and vote a regular ballot. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act is, so it used to be that jurisdictions with a lot of voting rights violations, anytime they were to pass voting legislation, it would have to be pre-cleared or pre-approved by the federal government. I remember back just a few years ago when I served on the Redistricting Elections Committee, there were certain Section 2 parts of the state that had to receive clearance during redistricting, and that's what it will do, is really make sure we're protecting all voters, not all people that we want to vote, but all voters. And that's really the difference between the two. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act is a more modern view of discrimination, voter suppression, and the practices that we see when individuals are doing that.
Wow, that's good. Let me ask you something, just a follow-up on that. And just so our viewers know, our panel guests are able to answer questions. So if you want to put any questions, you have any questions about what we're talking about, please put it in the chat. If you're on Zoom, put it in the chat. If you're on Facebook, put it in the in our thread. So Barb, you mentioned something about the paper ballot. So you are saying that the paper ballot is more, we should fight for that as opposed to just using computers.
Absolutely. So in Michigan, I'll give you like a quick one. In Michigan, we, the county clerk does the computer programming to teach the computers how to read the paper ballots, optical scan. And then we send the programming to the local clerks, city and township clerks, and they have a public meeting that nobody goes to, but it's a public meeting and you should go to it. And they test the programming, my programming, to make sure that the computers are reading the ballots. So they mark ballots any possible way a voted ballot can be marked. And they're testing to make sure that the computer is reading the ballots properly and the proper results come out as after, right? And then they zero everything out, lock it up. And then on election day, when voters vote or when absentee ballots come in, they get fed through. Anytime there is a concern, there's a paper backup. Paper is the most secure way to run an election, because we, in Michigan, after the election is over, most people think the election is over at 8 o'clock on election night. No. So it's over at election night, right? But then all of the poll books and the tapes, not the ballots, come up to the county level, and the county works with 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans to go through everything to make sure the polls balance, the number of voters that voted is the number of ballots that were voted, and balance everything. And then ultimately they'll certify the results. Republicans and Democrats work together, certify the results. And then for state and federal, they send those results up to the state for the state board of canvassers to certify. But paper ballots, after certification, there's an opportunity for a aggrieved party, so if they lost, to file for a recount. And in Michigan, we have very strict recount rules, but it is a recount. It is a hand recount of paper ballots. And the former president did not file for a recount in the state of Michigan. I think it's important to note. And then after the recount period is over, Michigan, we have audits, and these are required. They're done. There were over 250 audits done around the state after the November election. I just finished doing audits for the May election, and you know that your Lansing residents, certainly there's an upcoming August election. So we do audits. So the audits are done by the county clerk, their staff come to the local clerk and go through the ballots, and the Secretary of State will randomly select what precincts and what absentee counting boards and what races. So this November 2020 election, we audited the US Senate race, if my memory serves me, and we hand count those results. And then we do procedural audit as well to make sure that the safety protocols are all being followed, and the proper people are signing off, a Democrat and a Republican are signing off on things. So that's over 250 audits were performed after the November election, but we weren't done yet, because then there's the risk limited audit, which is a statistical audit that the state is piloting. So that was done, and they still weren't even done, because if you'll remember, some mistakes were made in a county in Michigan. That county was completely audited, a hand recount audit, and that was done by the Secretary of State's office. So all of these audits, and now we're hearing about this forensic audit. Well, forensic audits don't exist when it comes to elections. That exists in like banking. That doesn't exist in elections. But paper ballots are the most secure way to vote. And I didn't think that until I got involved in elections. Kim, I thought, well, you know what? I do my work with a credit union, my banking on my cell phone. I should be able to vote on my cell phone. And then I started working in elections. And I will forever maintain that we have to vote on paper, period. Must vote on paper.
Thank you, Barb, because I think a lot of people, sometimes we think that electronic is the best way to go. Everything is electronic. So thank you for the explanation. All right. Fonda should explain to our audience the For the People Act. We've got the HR 1, we've got some of the John Lewis. So explain to us For the People Act. It's important for us to know all these different things that are before us and not get them confused. All right.
Yeah. And you use the right word, not get confused.
Right.
Thank you, Kim, because the For the People Act is also the HR 1. So they're one and the same, but this is what happens in politics sometimes, confusion. It's like, look over there, but it's really over here. But they really are one and the same, and they're really trying to do a lot of good to restore and make sure that there's not discrimination in the voting process. So there, as my understanding, and I'm no scholar on it, Barb probably knows far more than I do, but my understanding is that they're really one and the same. They're just called something different, and she's certainly welcome to expand on that. But what the real important thing here is, we have to keep our eye on the prize. And we have to stay vigilant when it comes to some of these voting issues and these voting bills, because there's a lot of them. We had over 30, as you said, in the state of Michigan. There's been, I think, 43 states that have passed voter suppression bills, and they're passing so quickly. It amazes me how quickly they can get that through, but not a decent budget or not funding for education.
Right. Yeah, that's good.
It just blows me away that they can do that, or stopping the violence.
Yeah.
Stopping the killings.
Yeah.
So they can do all of this really fast, and it just slides through. But it slides through because we have to go to the polls and elect the people that care about us and that care about our needs, and that we can hold accountable, so that we don't have to keep coming up with HR 1s and the People's Act and the John Lewis. We don't have to have a voting rights that has a sunset date that has to be renewed.
Right.
And I don't know how we can get that message out to people. We're the only ones where we don't have a set that we can vote forever in perpetuity. Ours has to be renewed, I think, every 25 years or something. That is absolutely unacceptable to me.
Wow.
Unacceptable in this day and age. So it's HR 1, and it's the For the People Act. That's helping us get to where we are. But really, it's really addressing the bills that are trying to set us back prior to the Voting Rights Act.
Right.
So it's a shame that we have to go forward a little bit, and then we have to come all the way back, because we showed up in 2020 to vote, and we're going to still keep showing up. We are not running. We are not afraid. We will be there. So thank you.
Woo! Wow. I'm telling you, it took that feistiness, Teresa Abrams and everybody on this forum to shake people out of their complacency, to say, look, get out here and vote. And this is what happened in 2020. Bishop, can you add something on to what was said in regards to those various acts?
Yes, well, I think we must fight on two fronts. and of course, HR 1 and the John Lewis and various iterations thereof, both federally and within our state. I look at, from a historical point of view, seminal events in our history. You look at the ascension of Martin Luther King. I think our Martin Luther King of this day and age is a young, you call her Teresa, but it's Stacey Abrams.
Oh,
Stacey Abrams, through her efforts and her grassroots organizing, irrespective of all of the barriers that the state of Georgia, the Republican Party, and those vested in trying to disenfranchise people, Stacey Abrams single-handedly, of course, with her support base, was able to elect a Black Baptist preacher and a young Jewish liberal to the United States Senate in the state of Georgia, thus flipping the Senate to the Democratic Party, or the party at this particular time that is a champion in the enfranchisement of people. I am so impressed with Barb and the work she done, and Fonda. They are brilliant foot soldiers.
yeah.
But from the legislative and from the law and the side of it, but you cannot underestimate the power of grassroots. No matter how high the barrier is, no matter how deep the chasm might be, we still have to go to the poll. If we have to carry people to the polls in our vans, if we have to carry people in the polls in our wagons, that's where the battle is going to be ran. Because many of these states are going to be able to effectuate voter suppression and disenfranchisement law. But they don't know that the movement is bigger than their laws. The movement has a spiritual component behind it. And yes, if I had a Mount Rushmore, Stacey Abrams would be put on that Mount Rushmore, because it is that resilience and that attitude from our churches, from our locals, from our community organizers, our activists, our moms in kitchens, our young men on street corners. We still must advance the cause. Now, we had a catalytic force in Donald Trump that motivated us. But beyond the motivation, because you're not going to always have an incendiary lightning rod like Donald Trump. You're going to have a more sophisticated, educated, articulate, more reasonable person, but has the same underlying disenfranchising philosophy. And we still have, if we had that motivation, it would have been Hillary Rodham Clinton and not Donald Trump. But once we saw the evilness of disenfranchisement and the evilness of racism, we were motivated. We must keep that edge and that motivation. I know Barb and others keep fighting with these laws, educating us, but the ultimate education is get the souls to the polls.
Thank you so much, Bishop. I like what you said. It's just a feeling of all these voter suppression tactics that have gone. I think it's really fueling us to say, you can put whatever you want, whatever law you want, we're coming to the polls. If we have to stand in line, we're coming to the polls. Foot soldiers, whatever we need to do, you make a law, we're going to abide by it, but we're coming to the polls. So thank you for that segment. Clerk Byram, what should allies do to fight against states trying to implement laws that voting rights advocates say seek to prevent people from casting ballots? What should we be doing?
So reach out to your administrator, your election administrator, whether that's your county clerk, your local clerk, city or township clerk, and ask questions. Learn more about election administration. Serve as a precinct worker. It's a paid position. It's not paid well, but it is a paid position. Take the day off of work and serve as a precinct inspector. Clerks need precinct inspectors. So be a precinct inspector. Run for office. Run for office. please run for office. If ever you are interested in running for office, on a side note, I'll tell you how to do it. I certainly avail myself to individuals that want to run for office, individuals that want to learn more about elections. Talk to your neighbors, talk to your family, talk to your friends. If you are learning more about election administration and how safe and secure Michigan elections are, you can push back on some of that false narrative that they're using to pass this voter suppression legislation. Live out loud, share your story. Not everyone has photo ID. They just don't. Not everyone needs photo ID. They just don't. Some people rely on public transportation, so they don't need a photo ID. So they won't have it if this legislation goes into effect to require photo ID. Michigan, again, we already are a photo ID state, but there's that affidavit that you are who you say you are under penalty of perjury. You vote a regular ballot. Live out loud, share your story, how this will impact you. Because what this would do, if you don't have a photo ID and you go to the polls to vote, you don't have a photo ID, you have to vote a provisional ballot, and you have, I think, under current drafting, 6 days to prove a photo ID. Well, you're going to have to get a driver's license or a Michigan ID within 6 days. You need a birth certificate to get that. If you've been married, you're going to need a marriage license. If you've been married and divorced and married again, you're going to need divorce, and that is costly. It's very costly. That's a poll tax. And live out loud, share your story, hold your elected officials accountable, write letters to the editor, share stories. If you're reading news stories, if you're hearing things, fact check that stuff before you share it to your friends and family. Don't be the one sharing the big lie. So fact check things, get engaged, reach out to friends. If anyone wants to learn about election administration, I can geek out on elections for hours, and I would welcome someone to listen to me about it. So, reach out and really hold your elected officials accountable. Democrats and Republicans, hold them both accountable.
Wow, that's good. Fonda, should allies be launching voter rights initiatives focusing on strengthening pro-voter policies and protecting against suppression efforts?
Absolutely, allies should be doing that. That's the work that must be done. And I think we need to go back and start working with our younger people. We should be having conversations around the table at home, or, when we get together around the barbecue grill on the holidays. Why can't we also talk about preparing them for voting? There's a few things that's really important for us to start sharing with them. And Barb touched on one of them, is if you don't have ID and those bills pass all the way through and it becomes law, your vote won't be counted. And a lot of people don't keep up with the changes in the law. So they're not going to know. They're going to go to the poll like they normally do. They're going to try to take time off from work. They might take 2 buses to get there, and they're going to get in there. They're not going to have their identification, and then they're going to be presented with a provisional ballot. That to me is like, stay away from me. Because I know in the 2020 election, I believe there were 555 provisional ballots or something around in there, where they had 6 days to get to their clerk's office to prove they are who they say they are. And only about 13% showed up. So there's so many people who said, I don't have time to go to the clerk's office. I got to go to work. So we have to educate our young people and educate our voters on what they need to do. We need to start getting everybody right now to get an identification. Right. I mean, right now, because this is happening in real time. So it's important to get an identification, although I am just so totally against this requirement. Because as Barb said, there are states that are offering, I think, free identification. Big deal. But it's not free to have a birth certificate. You can't just walk in there and say, I'm Fonda and I need an ID. You're going to have a birth certificate. You're going to have proof of residency. And so those things cost money. It could be $75 or so to get a birth certificate. And we have people like my dad was born in Tennessee in a house by a midwife. His date of birth, he has 2 dates of birth. So there are going to be people who can't get it. Let's say somebody who was married and they got divorced and they didn't change the name on their identification. Guess what? They're not going to be able to vote when they go in there, but they're going to wait in line for 2 hours
Right.
to try to vote. And nobody told them because they don't want to tell you. They want to pass the law and they don't want you to know that you've got to have a valid identification. And that's critical. So we need to start that big push, educating people to get that valid ID. You're going to need it, and sign up for absentee ballot voting as long as we can. So those are things that we need to be doing in our communities. We need to go into the heart of the communities, roll up our sleeves and start where they are and bring them up to speed with the importance of voting and how to do it. So thank you, Kim.
Wow, that's powerful. I like the part where you said get out in the community, and that's really what, you know, part of what I want to do is continue to get out there in the community, whether through virtual or whether on foot. We've been doing this for over 30 years, and a lot, just like you said, a lot of people don't have the resources. All these laws are being made, but the people just don't have the resources. So thank you, Fonda, for that. Bishop, how can we circulate voter registration resources and create awareness and educate voters who are not privy to the various suppression tactics?
Well, by doing exactly what you're doing, by arming and weaponizing information. Information and knowledge is a weapon. And what you're doing, Stacey Abrams is in Georgia, but Kim, Milton-Mackey, Vonda Brewer are in Lansing. And every community must have their Fannie Lou Hamer. They must have their John Lewis. And every enclave, and every hamlet, and every village. And I salute you in what you're doing. We are on the same side. And I think we must weave together that tapestry of varying groups, both the clergy, which is historically involved, grassroots groups. I think Fonda said something very important. We must now bring our young people on to into the forum, into the conversation. John Lewis was a young man when he got his head cracked open on the bridge in Alabama. That's not the John Lewis that we've seen in the later iteration. It was a young person's movement. Dr. King was under, when he gave his I Have a Dream speech, he was 33, 34 years old. These were young people. And I think that is the power of what we are. I want to say something here. I almost welcome all of the organized disenfranchisement, because whenever God's people have been fought with demonic marginalization, they have risen up with the ability and the willingness to lose life and limb. And I think when Israel was in Egypt, not to be preachified here, Pharaoh said, we're going to kill the firstborn.
Yeah.
That didn't change nothing. The midwives hatched a plan. Moses was hid in a basket. So if they think after 400 years of what people of color and marginalized citizens have went through, that a legislation in Arizona, which today was a 6-3 vote by the Supreme Court that upheld their restrictive voter registration and voter laws 6-3. Not a Supreme Court, not Gorsuch, not Clarence Thomas, not any of these, Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett. That's not going to stop us as long as we have people informationalizing like yourself. Continue to utilize these forums, continue to use social media, and push and push and push.
Wow, I love it. Bishop, while I got you on, because there was mention about souls to the polls, and that was when, from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is when the preachers on Sunday, they took boatloads of people to register or what have you. What can you anybody say anything about the church connection and souls to the polls? Like what's that? I know we have our grassroots, we have our thing, but that was some massive things done with the souls of the polls. When
allow me to bring your work.
so I know they're trying to take that away.
Yeah, Yeah, demonism sophisticates itself, just like technology is sophisticating itself, and the barriers, you're creating higher barriers. We have to, within the structure of church and our traditional methodologies of getting to the polls and our traditional methodology of getting out to vote, as Ms. Brewer said, they're putting other road traps and snares. I think we have to also get souls to the polls. We can get people to the polls, but will they be eligible to vote once they get there? Right. I think this is where leadership, those that have the intellectual understanding of some of the sophistication that is being used to disenfranchise. It was not very sophisticated back in the day when they said you need to count how many jelly beans are in this jelly jar. If you can't count them, you can't vote. That was just blatant, overt racism and disenfranchisement. These more subtle forms of disenfranchisement have to be met prior to getting there. I know we can get souls to the poll, and I know we are motivated to get there. But my biggest struggle is if we get them there, in which we're going to get them there as we continue to do what we do, we must always double our efforts to make sure when they get there, they can vote.
Wow, that's powerful. That's powerful. And I know, I just wanted to put this out here, even this summer during the pandemic, I seen Barb, I mean, if they were protesting out there on the Capitol, if they was on the east side, north side, she had a booth registering people. I seen this for myself. She had signs up registering people to vote, black, white, whatever it was. She took employees. And so if you are interested in being, because I think that's our solution tonight, is we want to make sure that everybody is correct before they even go to the polls. So that's what I'm hearing tonight. Our community, put it out there. We want to be sure all these things are being put in place, but we want to make sure that our house is in order before we even go to the polls. Thank you, Bishop, for that. We're winding down. I'm telling you, it's some good stuff here. We're going to kind of switch gears for a second because it is a hot topic on critical race theory. All right. From my understanding, it arrived from the 1619 Project. And from there, I've heard over and over and over for many, many, many years, is why does the Blacks have a Black History Month? You know, why is February the shortest day? Why they can do, well, we can answer that by making race a part of what we teach in our education. So we can get rid of everything that separates. And I believe that's a part of what critical race theory is. So I'm going to go and put this question out again for our listeners who don't know, because this is something you need to pay attention to. This is what we all need to pay attention to. What is critical race theory? Anyone on the forum can tackle that.
I'll be glad to start. Okay. Critical race theory, really, it is not new. It's just a new version of limiting information in terms of the education. So it's really is where educators, or I'd say probably the politicians who are not like-minded, do not find value. In fact, don't want it to happen for our kids and our schools to be educated with the whole history. Mm-hmm. They don't want slavery taught in schools. They don't see that as an educational journey that children should go through. In fact, I think I've heard some say that it might be traumatic, but it is the truth. It is our history. And I think having those conversations is important for all people, and especially our youth. I think there is value for them understanding what the true history is. You can't leave out history. It's like making a peach cobbler and not putting in the peaches. It's not going to taste good. It's not going to be good. So you have to be inclusive of all of the history. But I know that when Trump was leaving office, one of the things he said, he wanted to ban the teaching of this project because he said that he said he accused history educators of teaching children to hate their own country, and convened a 1776 commission to promote patriotic education. So they don't want the whole story. But what's wrong with our story? I mean, it should never have happened, but it happened, and you can learn from things that happen, and it should be incorporated in every educational program. But Trump also threatened that if this was taught, if slavery was taught, we're going to take away some of that school funding, which is ridiculous. So that was the threat, was do it, and you're going to lose some of your funding. Wow. Which is absolutely ridiculous. So this is something that we can't be threatened by this. And we can't allow, we have to be very, very mindful of what happens at our state level and our federal level when it comes to education. It's critical to have these race conversations included in our educational materials. It is utterly ridiculous to not be inclusive about our history, even though we don't like it. Trust me, we don't. But I think it's important that we have those conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, Fonda. Bishop, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, critical race theory is a philosophical approach to why race has been so critical in the formation of America, and that policies that extend from that are really steeped not so much in race but in economics. And what you have in the teaching of critical race theory is that structures and systems that exist today exist to perpetuate the continuation of the dominance, basically, of white folks in this United States of America, and to advance white privilege. To counteract that, critical race theory seemingly speaks to structural and systemic racism, policies that exist that allow that system to continue to function. If you educate young people, at one time, Mitch McConnell was a kindergartner. At one time, McCarthy was in the 6th grade. At one time, Donald Trump was in the 4th grade. And at some point in our history, we have not educated those persons who have privilege to the real historical story. One of the stories in critical race theory is to explode the myth of American exceptionalism. Now I might be criticized for this, but American exceptionalism is in those slaves that crossed the Atlantic Ocean and for 400 years endured vicious, violent rape, beating, and lynchings under slavery. And then in post-slavery, it manifested itself in a different form of slavery, economic and political slavery. I'm gonna make this short if I can. So critical race theory teaches that your entire nation that was so looked upon, if I'm a person that is white, and I'm taught about the founding fathers and how great the founding fathers were, I also need to tell them that most of the founding fathers were slave owners, and most of those founding fathers upheld slavery. And most of those founding fathers, including Abraham Lincoln, had statements like, a black man will never be equal to a white man. I have to tell the entire story, that the nation that we call great primarily was built because of slave labor that was free for nearly 240 some years, that allowed it a strategic advantage in its competition globally. Exceptionalism has to be tempered with the reality of the evilness of slavery and the continuation of the latter iteration of that form, which is political, economic, and all variant forms of disenfranchisement. We have to tell that story. We have to tell the story that young Black females at age 13 were now the property, that people actually owned other human beings, not just to beat them, but to sexually abuse them, not just the females, any type of sexual expression, male or female, they were subject to that. That's the history that Mitch McConnell should have been taught in the 4th grade. And then he would begin to understand the angst and the anger, and understand that what he is on now, the foundation by which this nation stands on, the blood of those people are in that soil, and that the systems that exist now have been designed to maintain that position of privilege and superiority. That's it. And the projects that we're talking about, the 1619 critical race theory, are teaching those very difficult subjects and making America look itself in the face. You don't like looking yourself in the face when you know that all of my founding fathers, they were the fathers of this system, and that they were now the successors of the same system that in different ways do the same thing: marginalize, suppress, and disenfranchise.
Wow. Okay. That was so good. Listen, it just hit me back, because it hits home of all the anger that those of color continue to go through. And so tonight, I just wanted to make sure that we hit on that, so our viewers know that your child, again, it is your responsibility, if it's not taught in the educational system, is to find out your history. And so this critical race theory is a part of trying to find out our history. So thank you, Bishop, for that. And we are running out of time. We got about a couple minutes. So I want to leave with this. What message do you want to leave with the audience? What message do you want to leave? And before you answer that, I also want to put on there, Clerk Byron says, check your voter registrations and see if you have an election this August 3rd. mi.gov/vote. And if you need that information, I'll share that also. And from clerk herself, she's there. There has been over 10,000 absentee ballots mailed out for the August 3rd election as of June 23rd. She has been working. Our clerk, I'm telling you, she just don't carry the title. She is the truth. Okay, so ending this, what message do you want to leave with the audience? We're going to start with you, Fonda.
Thank you. And thank you, Barb. And I have to give a shout out to Mary Clark in Delta Township, because she's our clerk and she is one tough sister. Let me tell you, she's on the ball about voters and making sure that everybody has the right and opportunity to vote. So my message to all of you, and we've been talking about this word tonight quite a bit, and it is disproportionately. Mm-hmm. And so I say to you, we are disproportionately reflected in history. Mm-hmm. We are disproportionately promoted in military ranks. Mm-hmm. We are disproportionately elected to Congress. We are disproportionately hired in senior positions in corporations. We are disproportionately appointed to boards and commissions. We are disproportionately silenced or censored on issues advancing the achievement of the people of color, the elderly, the poor, the disabled, and the LGBTQIA community. And we are disproportionately impacted in school expulsions. We are disproportionately we are treated differently because of our zip codes. Mm-hmm. This is trauma. Mm-hmm. If you don't know what trauma is, this is trauma. This is absolutely trauma. We are victims of cumulative, disproportionately wounding, is what I call it. Mm-hmm. And we've had enough of it. So what can we do? We can refuse to be silenced. Yeah. And we can refuse to be excused from the voting process. We don't want an excused absence. We don't need it. We don't want it. We're going to show up. We're going to vote. We're going to get IDs, whatever they throw at us. We're going to get in the game and we're going to get it, because each of us need to go in our communities, grab 5 people and educate them on what it's going to take to vote under these new voter suppression laws. And I want to lastly say, they're creating a solution for a problem for a solution that doesn't exist, or for a solution for a problem that doesn't exist. We have a great voting system here in Michigan. Leave it alone. Thank you.
Wow, thank you.
And thank you and Greg, Kim, you and Greg, for moderating the show. And I absolutely love being on a panel with the Bishop and with Barb, the BBs. Love you both.
I tell you, you are something else. I just love you. She's a resource upon resources. Thank you, Trustee Brewer. All right, Clerk Byram, what message do you have to leave for our listeners?
So for the listeners, our elections are safe and secure. And one of the best ways to make sure they continue to be safe and secure is by participation. Right. So become a precinct worker, drive the van for Souls to the Polls. Please drive that van, obey all speed limits, and wear a seatbelt. Exercise your right to vote. Make sure you exercise your right to vote and bring your neighbors, talk to your family and friends. Voter participation is so important, and we have to hold our elected officials accountable. And then on a side note, sometimes conversations aren't comfortable, and it is those conversations that we need to continue to have. So I thank you, Kim, Bishop, Trustee Brewer. Thank you for having me. Thank you for continuing to have those conversations with me, allowing me the opportunity to amplify messages, even when I'm still learning about them myself. Yeah. So this has been an absolute pleasure. I've learned quite a great deal. And I thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Bishop, take us home.
Well, I think we might form us a Motown singing group, Kim Mackey and the Killer Bees, Brewer, Byram, and the Bishop. And Fonda reminded me that I got to give a shout out to my clerk, Chris Swope, who does an exemplary job of trying to get out the vote and making sure everybody's enfranchised. I want to say something, again, controversial. If back to critical race theory, if you're going to change a system, we can change things, but we're going to have to change laws, and we're going to have to change the system. Democrats, and I'm a Democrat, a lifelong Democrat, never voted Republican, but it is not just enough to get to the polls, because we've been getting to the polls from 1965 on, and even before that. And the African-American and the persons of color, their vote has changed elections. It allowed us to elect the 44th, the 46th. And if we would have come out in a little more, in a massive approach, we could have avoided this catastrophe, this aberration in history of the 45th president. But I will say this, we're going to have to elect people who are going to be willing to change policy, not just certain voter rights, but structural policy. Fonda laid out the disproportion in prison population, the disproportion in all dysfunctions of society. Why? African Americans are not endemic by nature for dysfunction. We're not endemic by nature to be criminogenic. We're not disproportionate by nature. And Democrats typically, starting with the New Deal in Roosevelt in 33, the Great Society speech of Johnson in Ann Arbor, Michigan, go blue, and eventually the war on poverty, Democrats typically pour a lot of money into these kind of efforts. It's going to take more than pouring money. Money does not change the system and the structure. It helps. Don't stop the money, but you have to change the law. This is why I call the senator from Virginia, West Virginia, Joe Manchin, I call him out now. You can't be a dog and a cat and walk the middle of the fence. This is a war for the soul of our nation. And I need persons in Washington. And so when we go to the polls, we're going to get there. Kim, Milton-Mackey, Stacey, Abram, we're going to get the souls to the poll. Barb, Brian, Fonda Brewer, we're going to make sure they're educated and they're ready to go. But we also have to have candidates. And that's why I'm telling both Fonda and both Barb, you're young enough, they're greater horizons for you. We need those kind of people sitting in our state legislation, not just by Democrats in name, but a commitment to the radicalization and the overhauling of the structure that has supported the idea and the concept of white supremacy and white privilege for the last 400 years. We have to change those systems, not just with money, not just with pouring money, but you got to change them with a structured, systemic change. We cannot have 6-3 Supreme Courts. We cannot have a razor thin balance on our Congress or our Senate. We must start electing persons. I don't care whether they're Democrat or Republican or independent, that have a commitment to the change of a structural problem that has existed for 400 years. And we continue to recycle these ideas and these programs, but we have not radically altered the structure and the system that has kept people of color for 400 years in systemic, social, educational, political, governmentally, whatever you want to call it, slavery. Slavery is not just in the cotton fields of Mississippi, but it is in the boardrooms of our corporation, which you don't see people of color. Slavery is in the courtrooms of our nation, where you don't see Black judges sitting behind that bench. We have tokenism and token representation. Slavery is when your police force does not look like the community they police. Slavery is when your policies do not liberate and repair the massive damage done by 400 years of organized and structural and systemic violation of human rights and privileges to be a part of the great American society. I'm through preaching.
Bishop, we love you. Fonda, I love you. Clerk Byram, I love you. Greg, thank you so much. But since where I come from, the bishop gets the last word and he also gets to dismiss us. So Bishop, give us a dismissal and put in the atmosphere what you want to happen.
But finally, lest I get the devil get out of jail card, it is his spirit that is behind all of this. So we coming against him too.
Yes.
God bless you. I bless my clerk. I bless my friend, Sister Brewer, as you continue to express yourself in your areas of expertise. I bless you, Kim Milton-Mackey. Continue, fight. Let's forge ahead. We're on the same team. We got the same vision and same goal. I pray for success. I pray for the future of our nation. I pray for Joseph Robinette Biden and Kamala Harris. I pray for our Senate. I pray for our majority leader and our minority leader. I pray for both Schumer and McConnell. I pray for both Pelosi and McCarthy. I pray that this nation would have a cathartic moment and a revival, that we might exemplify what America can be. It could become the greatest nation that have ever walked on the terra firma. Lord, help us now. Bless now these advocates, these community stalwarts, that they might continue this message. We come against the spirit of suppression, marginalization, interposition, and as Dr. King said, nullification. In the name of your darling son, Jesus, I pray this prayer. Amen. Amen.
God bless everyone.